Hello, welcome. All right, so we're gonna be switching over to our interview portion of the stream. I hope you don't mind that I was talking about the Destiny shit prior to bringing you on the screen.
Oh no, that's totally okay.
Okay, this is great. All right, let me switch my scenes.
Okay, take your time.
Look at that. Is it working? Okay, look at that. It
Oh my
almost
God,
looks
incredible.
professional. We almost did it in one smooth motion. Look at that. All right.
Yeah.
Welcome in. All right. I have to grab this window over to here because I don't want that to leak. Okay. All right. Casey Tron, famous streamer, one of the OGs, says she's buying your book right now.
Oh wait, that's incredible.
So
yeah,
you
she's
probably could have
in
gotten
there.
a free book, Casey.
Yeah, definitely.
But
Except for the
buy it anyway.
Replied to DMs. It's fine.
Well, okay. Let me just. I hope you don't mind. I prefer a conversational style
Absolutely.
over
Yeah, I think that's the best way to
doing
do it.
like interviews with questions, like a journalistic person would do. I just like to chill and just talk and have you meet my community. We see all of you are on the chat. We're reading the chat now. So let me see.
Like
here.
everyone's saying, get Hassan off the screen.
Oh yeah,
Hassan
fuck
awfully
Hassan.
quiet.
Yeah. Who cares about Hassan? I just use up debate.
Yeah,
There
of course,
it
of
is.
course.
That's what we wanted. Okay.
There we go.
Beautiful.
Technically, Hassan is also in that book, so he's still on screen in a way.
True. So, wow. This is incredible. My book, Stream Big, is out now. It tells the story of Twitch through the lens of 9 different streamers, large and small. Should have picked me as one of the 9. I'm just gonna say.
mean, yeah, you're quoted in there. Just
I am
as
quoted.
you saw
That
the
is
other
true.
night, you're in there glazing Hassan.
Oh, I can't believe you did that to me. I thought that was background, Jason, Nathan. Like, what are you doing? You're violating journalistic ethics. They were right. They were right. I said this is on background, and here he is quoting me.
I don't think you said that,
No,
but
I
whatever.
didn't say that. I'm kidding.
Okay, good. I was like, uh-oh.
He was like, oh no, they're going to reveal. So Nathan, why don't you go ahead and why don't you give your biography for the community, if you don't mind?
Yeah. So I'm a journalist and reporter. I've been covering games and topics adjacent to games like content creation and live streaming for a long time. Like I've been a journalist for like 15 years, and then I started covering Twitch and content creation probably like 7 or 8 years ago at least. And yeah, so right now I work for a site called Aftermath. We are a worker-owned and reader-supported website about games and digital culture. And before that, I was at the Washington Post. And then before that, I was at Kotaku back when Kotaku was still good.
Yeah, I mean, anytime anything's good, it gets ruined, by capitalists. What can you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting to watch, or not interesting. It's been really sad to watch what's happened to the country because, so Kotaku was, bought by a private equity firm, which then basically stripped it and all these other websites for parts. And half the stuff that the United States government is doing right now mirrors what happened to those websites. It's just the private equity playbook, but run on a country.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good place to start, because this is something that's near and dear to my heart, which is I'm a gamer, I've been playing video games since 1988, chat. So it's been a minute. I started off with the regular Nintendo, playing Duck Hunt and all that shit. I still have my original Nintendo somewhere. I have my gold, I think it was Zelda 2 cartridge and stuff like that. So I've been a long time gamer. And the one thing I've kind of seen that has bothered me quite a bit has been the way gaming culture has adopted these narratives about what is ruining gaming. So I think this is the best place to start, which is I have seen gaming go from this niche thing that you were kind of embarrassed to even admit you did. Being a video gamer in 1992 was kind of another way of saying you are a friendless nerd. You know what I mean?
I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. That's for damn sure.
No, I did. So that's what you.
You're very popular.
I'm kidding. But and then it kind of grew into the mainstream, with my generation. I think it was my generation that really made gaming like a normal activity that you could do that wasn't loser shit, right? When I went to college originally, it was before Xbox Live, so just to understand, right? When I was in college, we had the original Xbox, and we would do system link shit. And then we figured out a way to do it through the like Ethernet of the college, so we could be playing our four player split screen in one dorm, and they were playing their 4-player split screen in another dorm. It was really amazing hack. So this is pre Xbox Live shit, and just to bring it back to a question that you can answer, which is, why do you think that the right wing has been so effective in distracting from like the way that capitalism has made gaming a way to extract profit, and kind of replace the blame and move it to like marginalized groups or like individuals? What do you think is just to make a question more concise, what do you think is the cause of like this conservative gaming culture led by figures like Asmongold that blames these people instead of like the way gaming is designed to make money?
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to kind of that nerd culture origin you were talking about, where, you had a lot of people who played video games and felt like they were outcast from society. They were ostracized. They didn't have a lot of friends. And so then, further down the line, games are mainstream, have achieved massive mainstream acceptance. They're a huge industry. Everybody plays games now.
Bigger than
but you
movies.
Still have that contingent of people who feel like they either are or were oppressed for playing video games at some point in their life. And that then you have all these other people who aren't like them trying to come in and take the hobby away from them. And that's like not correct. That's not what's actually happening. Just more people are playing games, more people are making games. That's going to lead to a more diverse selection of both people and, games and art and whatnot. But it's very easy to manipulate people along those lines, to be like, hey, this thing that you have defined your identity with, someone else is coming to take it away from you, even though they haven't earned it like you did.
Yeah. I think I talk about this sometimes, is one of and I want to like get your thoughts on this. I have kind of a theory where a lot of the like gaming commentary space is actually people who don't like gaming anymore, like just playing video games in general, and like they're more nostalgic for their childhood innocence. They're more nostalgic to the way they used to feel playing games as a kid. The not having the anxiety of being an adult and kind of just being able to lose yourself in a game, and the escapism of it. So it's like almost a nostalgia that they're pining for, right?
Yeah.
And instead of like maturing and understanding that I'm an adult man now and I have adult male responsibilities and I enjoy gaming as a hobby when I can, they have this nostalgia, and it's being kind of captured by alt-right forces, so they could use them politically for what is really just, you don't really like gaming that much anymore, and you're nostalgic for an old way you used to feel, and it's being hijacked by fascists to convince you to target minorities for their political power.
Yeah. I mean, there's also like kind of there's another thing happening there too, I think, which I get to in the book to an extent. A lot of those streamers, or a lot of those content creators, may not necessarily like games anymore because they also don't play them in a way that lends itself to enjoyability. Like, when it's your job, when you are playing games, the same games, oftentimes, somebody like Asmongold played a ton of World of Warcraft, for example, playing those games for like 8 or 10 hours per day, like you're going to burn out really hard on them and probably experience them very differently from somebody who's just playing them as a hobby. Like, dips in and out a couple hours per day, just like when they feel like having fun. And so then down the line, you're like, okay, these games need to be updated more. They need to change more. They've got to be different, because I personally am getting bored. And you get this weird effect where these people who do not play these games normally believe that they should be the main audience for them.
Right.
And that like the game should be updated along the lines that they want them to be. But I think that no number of updates can stop somebody who's playing a game for like 10 plus hours per day from getting tired of it, from wanting something new. And then on top of that, you have the other compounding factor of just like the way that big games are made has changed a lot over the past couple of decades. They are now made by hundreds or thousands of people over the course of sometimes 8 or more years. And that results in companies wanting to make things that are very safe, or I mean, what you hear a lot now is that almost every development process for a major game was a fucking disaster internally. Like, take it, for example, the most recent Dragon Age. That game was rebooted multiple times in development. It started out as like a live service multiplayer game. Then it turned into a different kind of game. Then it turned into like this weird mishmash of elements from both attempts at making it, where they were just like, get it out the door.
That's amazing.
Yeah, like their internal goal is just make something that isn't totally busted. And they like achieved it, but what came out of all of that was still like at best pretty mid, right? And that's what you see a lot. Like so many big games that come out now are not egregiously broken, but they are merely functional because of all of these different factors that just happen in development. Because making big games is not the way that we do it right now. It's not sustainable. It's
I, just to build off what you're saying and raise a topic that I think you might be well positioned to discuss. Those of us on the left, we talk about the enshittification of everything, which is like, this is something that you're seeing in all aspects of society, not just video games, but movies, other art, music, just the products that you buy on the store. We're seeing like less and less polish. We're seeing more and more slapdash, just in time, profit driven. I call it MBA thinking or bean counter thinking, where they like, you buy a product because it's a quality product and you learn about it word of mouth. And then the company starts to expand. They start hiring senior management with MBAs, and they start saying, well, I'm going to cut back on the material cost. We'll make 5% more profit if the denim is thinner. Well, now you're not buying those jeans are no longer a superior product compared to all the rest of the jeans that are out there. They're just another, and we see this like with luxury brands, right? Michael Kors was originally this really luxury brand, and now it's like being shitified. It's becoming slop that you find in the bargain bin because the quality of the product is declining. And so you have these cycles of like a passionate engineer or a passionate artist or a passionate like product developer makes a really outstanding product, and then that company grows, and then it matures into a public company, and then it just becomes focused on making profits for shareholders, and it sucks. And we especially see this in gaming, and I think the best example in modern gaming for the left-wing perspective being right, in my opinion, is Baldur's Gate 3. Because it shows how, so that's like a mid-sized studio, correct?
Yeah, they're like a few hundred people, basically.
So it's not like an indie project, but it's not. It's also not EA. It doesn't have those tens of thousands of people, but many people recognize that as an outstanding video game, right? And it's an outstanding video game because the man who created it, it's an auteur. It is an artist who wanted to make a certain game. Damn it, if it makes money or not, it's going to be this way. And he was rich, so he was able to fund that development. And he was focused on the artistic merit of the game, right? As opposed to, how do I figure out ways of making this the most profitable possible game? How do I take advantage of psychological tricks?
Well, it was also like, it was a very well-managed project too. And that like internally, they scoped it well. They knew what they wanted to achieve. They like set a deadline for when it needed to be done. And like they blew past that a little bit, but they didn't fall into all these traps that a lot of modern game developers do. At least at the bigger studios, where it's like, okay, we're going to delay it again. Oh shit, actually this game is not turning out the way we wanted. Okay, reboot it because, our executives are worried, or like it's not going to please shareholders. It's not going to sell enough. Okay, add all these elements, chase all these trends. They're like, no, we're not going to chase any trends. We're just going to do this game that's sort of in the style of an older, version of the PC RPG, but it's going to have all these new elements that we came up with that are like unique to us. And we think it'll find an audience because we want to play it. And so hopefully other people will want to as well. And yeah, it worked. Does that work every time? Unfortunately, no. Like the video game market is super saturated.
Sometimes
hundreds
people
of games come out on Steam every week.
It's true of anything, right? It's true of any like artistic project. Sometimes you're going to write a book, even if you have the best of intentions. Like what makes art is the execution. And you can't, and capitalism doesn't care about that. In fact, they don't believe it. And this is to build off what you're saying. Like the big film studios, they don't really believe in such a thing as a good movie. They just think it's like, how is a movie positioned towards the demographics?
Will it make $1 billion? Yes or no?
As is the marketing good? Did they have a good marketing budget? Did they release it? Like were they catching the trend? How was the algorithm? Like the auteur art of making, or the vision of an auteur, or the vision of even a collaborative film. It doesn't have to be a single vision. I was just
going to say, I think that in video games, because of people like Hideo Kojima,
right, they still have that.
The idea of the auteur is overestimated in general games of this massive collaborative effort. In movies, directors have a lot of say. In video games, the director has comparatively less say, and it's very much about like the team and what they're all able to achieve together. And especially for some of the bigger games, ones that do turn out good, like it's pretty miraculous, like how much they are able to coordinate and create something that feels cohesive despite there being hundreds or thousands of people working on it.
Yeah. Oh no, totally. Like my overall beliefs on this is, it's like, I think a lot of regular gamers really underestimate just how difficult making a game is, especially a modern, AAA or a game that has millions of dollars of investment in it. And so the reason why I bring in the initiatification and I'm bringing in these other ideas about capitalism and exploitation and shareholders is we can see a lot of what makes games bad. Like you brought up that Dragon Age game. Mm-hmm. The Dragon Age game probably was shifted back to an RPG to chase Baldur's Gate. Like when they saw how successful a traditional RPG game with a fantasy theme did, they were like, "Oh, we could actually just make Dragon Age." but they had spent so much time chasing that live service crap multiplayer vision. Why was that even pursued in the first place? I doubt that the developer that was developer focused. That was probably a mandate from the board or from
certainly
from the C-suite. They were chasing some trend.
Yeah, ever since BioWare was purchased by EA, like almost every game that they make has chased some trend or another. Like Mass Effect became progressively more of an action game series. Dragon Age has chased every trend in the book. Like Dragon Age Inquisition was inspired by MMO design. Anthem, which flopped majorly, was like this live service, Destiny rival, at least it wanted to be. Yeah, I mean, like this is always where it comes from, is executives meddling and then turning things that could be good into shells of themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're kind of seeing constantly in our society, and then that's why that's to like draw it back into streaming. Okay, so we have that analysis. I think we've established that the way that games are made now is for profit, and that creates certain incentives, which is you have executives who don't care about games. They would leave EA and go work for Coca-Cola. You know what I mean? Right. They're there to make profits for their shareholders, and line go up, and they look at art like any other commodity. They don't believe in. They're not there for art. They're there to make money. Okay, and that has led to a certain type of industry that we're burdened with, which is focused on extracting the most money it can from the communities that enjoy the product, right? Mm-hmm. And so that draws us to streaming, right? Because streamers are this incredibly powerful new form of media where an individual voice, which doesn't have institutional backing, can grow a community, can grow a position of prominence, and can speak their mind largely free of the traditional constraints of media. We don't have to worry so much about advertisers. We don't have to worry so much because we're directly supported by our communities. We have more leeway to speak our minds and pursue different perspectives that may have been suppressed in prior versions of mass media.
Yeah. Although, I mean, if we're talking about games in particular, it depends on the people, because some people rely heavily on brand deals with oftentimes like game publishers and whatnot. So you still have these potential conflicts of interest, or, I think especially if you're kind of a mid-sized or smaller creator and you rely a lot on those deals for your income, then like you may as well be fucking muzzled, because you're too worried about pissing everyone off and not getting access anymore, which is a similar problem to what a lot of games journalists faced back in the day.
That is right out of Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent, the 5 filters. One of them is advertising and access. The idea of, I don't want to say something about this game being shit, live service slop, because I want to be invited to the next pre-release. I want to get the keys early, right? Like one of the main ways people grow in the gaming space is they get a beta key. and they get permission to release gameplay early. So like regular people like me, I can't get access to the game early. So if a person gets a key early and they get permission to publish gameplay, everybody who's interested in that game is going to click on them, and they're going to get a huge advantage. So there's a huge incentive to play ball if you actually want to be a successful gaming streamer, right? Yeah. So you're exactly right. The advertisers are controlling the content, and they are undermining those people that are honest, and it's creating a climate where people are yes men, or they are company shills.
Yeah, exactly. And, again, this is not a new problem necessarily. I think this is the same problem that you saw, especially in like the magazine era of games journalism, and to an extent still in the web era. It's always been there. It's just that I think that if we're talking about journalism, then at least some publications tried to act like, okay, well, no, we have this firewall between editorial and advertising. These are handled by separate departments, all of that. Whereas I think a lot of content creators, by virtue of being, not necessarily big teams. I mean, like in some cases, you'll have like a streamer and their mods, but their mods are volunteers. They're not really part of a team. They're not getting paid. It's one person handling a lot of this stuff, and therefore like taking deals and then also doing the commentary and thinking in the back of their head, well, that person gave me a code and they might get pissed at me if I say what I really think, which is that this game is dog shit. So I'm going to say that this game is got some issues, but you should still check it out. Haha. That kind of a thing. So, it's just like the lines are very blurry, which is not ideal. But then at the same time,
so especially I think when creators get bigger, has a point.
Yeah.
I actually
sort of.
But that's the, and this is how I would, not to interrupt you, but I just want to kind of create a narrative connection with all these ideas that we've been playing with, which is, okay, so you have this industry of shills. You have the with streamers, right, which are the biggest public voices talking about gaming, and then you have this incestuous industry run for profit. But you still have consumers and regular people seeing that the games suck and complaining about it, and possibly creating a kind of ground up grassroots effort to constrain or regulate the corporations to maybe push the industry toward more, smaller studios, or, collectively owned products, or things that are not from, the big corporations, and make their line go down. And to square that circle, to prevent that, we have to find a populist target to explain why games are bad. And that simultaneously protects the industry from real criticism.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing the beginnings of that, in that, all of the layoffs in the games industry in the past couple of years have been a lightning rod for this kind of conversation. Because on one hand, you have, companies just laying people off willy-nilly. Even like this week, the North American team for Marvel Rivals got laid off. Now, granted, not a huge team, only like a handful of people. I think the number is like 6 or something, maybe a little bit more than that.
Right.
But still like pretty ridiculous when you're talking about one of the breakout success stories in all of video games in the past handful of years. Like no live service game takes off the way that Marvel Rivals did, improbably. And yet people still lost their jobs, which, why? Because of line go up, basically.
I think that's
an easy story to, that's an easy story to sell. That's an easy story to package. And then on the other side of that, you have the ongoing unionization effort in video games, which is still pretty nascent, still pretty small relative to the size of the industry. But that can, repeatedly bang that drum of saying, look at all these layoffs that are happening. This is terrible. This isn't fair. And like these games are generating more profit than ever. So we need to protect ourselves. We need to protect workers, the people who are actually creating these games that are so good as to merit, all this money coming in.
I would say that the Marvel Rivals one, I'm going to give a little bit of a heterodox opinion on this one. I think this one might be a larger geopolitical situation with...
It is. NetEase is like trying to pull a lot of people from... Yeah, they have a whole plan in place. This was apparently something they were going to do, or they had set up before Marvel Rivals even like became this big success story.
It's more like the U.S. is targeting China for global isolation, and so Chinese companies are kind of retrenching and bringing their the workers back home, workers back to China. And I think it's all related. I mean, this is all related to a larger, it's not necessarily for me the best example of this, although you're right. I mean, it sucks. I feel bad for those guys, but I don't know how much of that was necessarily just that company trying to make money versus protecting itself from, incoming sanctions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, why is it protecting itself? To make money. Like, this is the bottom line of every company.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, protecting itself from the U.S. government, yeah.
Yeah. I think that even in these cases, it's still an example of kind of what gives or what goes first, which is always the workers. It's never the executives. It's never the people who are actually drawing these massive paychecks. Anytime that there's any sign of, choppy waters or whatever, they're like, okay, get rid of employees, get rid of workers, get rid of the people who make games and who are responsible for the success, not, these people, these vampires who are pulling these massive paychecks while doing basically nothing.
Well, that's how our entire society is structured,
Yeah, but if you can point to this really concrete example of it in an industry people know, then they start to really latch on to the idea. And they're like, wait, this is tangibly affecting me. I care now.
Yeah, and I think this is the larger point. So now we have creators like Asmongold, and we also have weird. I don't know if Asmongold is the worst of the worst on this specific topic. I think he engages with it and he panders with it. He's not necessarily the number one numero uno evil harasser of developers, but I think he boosts it, which is this idea that there is a secret, I don't know, leftist cabal or I mean, it's like the DEI or Jewish if they're really alt-right, it's Jewish if they're alt-right, it's DEI if they're far right, it's and so you have this kind of shadowy cabal of non-gamer people that are trying to propagandize us and force us to be exposed to trans characters and black women and we just why can't we go back to games where they were big-titted blondes and ruthless, muscle-bound grunting guys saying "yeah" while with the cigar in his mouth, right?
No, the DEI conspiracy works so well that I live in New York now, where I see those types of people every day. They forced me to do this. I didn't have a choice.
Yeah. I mean, I think you are one of the main sources of the conspiracy. No, I'm just kidding. But no, it also. But can you give an account of what the DEI conspiracy even is? Can you explain it to the audience?
Oh, man.
What they're even arguing?
So, in games, because it's so ridiculous and it's metamorphized so many times. But the genesis of it, where it really took root, was last year. Gamers and I think one of the main ringleaders for it was Mark Kern, and then Asmongold picked it up.
Mark Kern.
But they identified this consultancy firm called Sweet Baby Inc. Who basically what they do is narrative consultation. They help people punch up their scripts essentially. And then on the side, in addition to that, they can help people out with issues of diversity and, making characters from diverse backgrounds more realistic. By virtue of a lot of the people who work there having lived experience. A lot of them are people of color or people who are not heterosexual or things of that nature. And so they've worked on a number of high profile projects, albeit again in a consulting capacity. So basically, they take a look at where the game's at, say, here are our recommendations. You can use them if you want. If not, oh well. And that's pretty much the extent of it. In a couple cases, they've embedded with teams. I think they were embedded with the God of War team. But by and large,
isn't that
fairly
considered
minor
a
role.
Good game? Is it God of War?
Well, no, this is the really funny part. Is the anti-Sweet Baby people were they've ruined every game they've touched, and it's this list of award-winning games, and it's aside from most of them, but they turned it into this conspiracy that Sweet Baby was walking around in the shadows with a gun to the back of the head of the industry, saying you must incorporate diversity into all of these games, and if you don't, we will somehow make you pay, and suggesting that, for example, they added gay pride flags to Spider-Man 2. They made that possible, even though that's not really their job. They don't.
I mean, isn't it in New York City? That's New York City. There's gay pride flags everywhere. What are you talking about?
There sure are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
all these ridiculous arguments. And so then that sort of just spiraled outward into this broader notion of like, there are secret pockets of DEI everywhere in video games, and they're the reason games are bad now. It's not because of these larger structural issues. It's not because executives mismanaging development projects. It's not because of layoffs. It's not because of all these things that you can see in front of your eyes. It is instead shadowy cabal. Like, it's the classic, fascist playbook or whatever you want to say. Like, you make up a shadowy cabal, and then you say they're everywhere, and only a few powerful people at the top can weed them out.
Right. And one of the things that's really interesting about that in particular is, once again, my more left-wing materialist analysis is superior to explain even Sweet Baby Inc. because it's like, why is the industry interested in being more authentically diverse? Why is the industry interested in having games that are like at least aware on these topics? And the answer is money. So they can sell it to more people, so they could expand, because the middle-aged incel game obsessive guy, they're already fully penetrated that, right? So they're trying to get games that would appeal to new markets and expand the market. This is the capitalist imperative, right? How do we make our games appealing to more and more people so that more and more people will want to buy them? There's different strategies for doing that, but if you just like, you adjust a narrative a little bit, or you show a little bit more representation, or you show a little bit more fleet-footedness and some of these topics, you can make these games more interesting to more marginalized or like marginal gamers. What I mean by that is like somebody who may or may not buy every game, right? Or somebody who may only buy one game a year. If you get those people,
which is most people who play games, by the way. Like, most people don't buy that many games. People who are like playing a new thing every other week are in the minority. They are like a very, active minority within video games. But like, most people, buy 1 or 2 games per year. It's a big release, and that's all they play. They play Call of Duty or FIFA. And then other people just pop in, once every several years for like the new Zelda or the new GTA or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, it's actually good for gaming to get more people as gamers. Right. And and for these games it's like a very low hanging fruit. It's high rate of return for these companies to do that. And so it's just like, and as long as you're not fundamentally undermining the project itself, I think you're an idiot not to try to do that. Now,
and like, the problem is that they are fundamentally undermining the project itself, just in other ways. But because there are now more diverse characters, it's easy for people to conflate, they added these more diverse characters, and at the same time, this game series got bad. And it's like, well, then one must have caused the other.
Exactly.
When in reality, if you look even slightly beneath the like surface level, that's obviously not true. But it's such, again, like I was saying earlier, it's such an easy narrative to weaponize, and so people do.
And I think this is the main point, is that this narrative is weaponized, and it in fact defends the status quo. It defends the big corporations. Ironically, by targeting Sweet Baby Inc., you're protecting EA. By targeting Sweet Baby Inc., you're protecting the live service model, the C-suite guys that are really making game shit, that are putting loot boxes into everything. They're making, time gating everything, making everything live service, making everything, how do we extract as much money as possible out of your pocket? How do we release broken games and fix them with DLCs? All this kind of stuff is conflated to, there's a gay character in it. And then, one of the things, and then this brings me to the next question I want to talk to you about, and maybe we could talk about Twitch, non-gaming Twitch.
Yeah, let's do it.
Which is, okay, so, but then you have this is why I said Baldur's Gate 3 earlier. Baldur's Gate 3 has the most woke-ass character creator I've ever seen in my life. I made a trans female character, and I was able to select their penis, and slightly adjust their voice, and it's just like, there is, and there was pronouns, and it's like, there's never been a more woke character creator than Baldur's Gate 3, and that is recognized as one of the best RPGs ever made, and yet these guys seemingly don't have any emotion in condemning it as woke. How does that make sense? How did they, what is there any attempt to explain woke can be fun?
Well, I mean, this is always the thing. It's the same underlying Like, because these are the same people who banged the drum for years of like, go woke, go broke. And they just, every time that something that was ostensibly woke did really well, like, because they first started, saying all of that during the peak Marvel era. So you had all these movies that featured, at least like attempts at, or like performative progressivism, right? Like the movies themselves and their messaging is very regressive, but they at least like put, people of color and like occasionally almost maybe hinted at people being queer on screen. And they're like, oh, well, everything that's even a little bit woke is going to fail miserably. And then $1 billion box office, $1 billion box office, $1 billion box office. And they're like, not that, something else.
It's actually not woke.
And it's always been this inherent contradiction of them saying, oh, everything woke is bad. Don't look over there. That thing it doesn't count. It's different. It's like, no, it's not. You just exclude everything that doesn't fit your very narrow argument.
Yeah, and I think we've largely seen this play out in politics broader, and this is like one of the something that I wrestle with, which is the idea of these kind of thought terminating cliches or like punchy talking points to avoid grappling with stuff with any level of substance, right? One of the things that I deal with is people, and as a friend and collaborator with Hassan. One of the things that happens to Hassan is people will be like, "Oh, you support terrorists. You are a terrorist supporter." And then you go, "Okay, what do you mean by that?" And then he had the Houthi on his stream, and he played terrorist music, and I was like, "Okay, the kid wasn't a Houthi. He was a 19-year-old from Yemen. He said he wasn't a Houthi." So he wasn't a member of, and the Houthis were not a terrorist organization at the time because they were suffering from a Saudi genocide. And it was a mainstream liberal position that we should stop supporting Saudi Arabia's aggressive war in Yemen. But people have picked up these like talking points, and then they throw them out there, and then they don't engage with it further. It's like, okay, now that I broke this down, he isn't a terrorist supporter. Actually, he has criticized these groups. Why do you like Hassan now? And it's like, no, I don't. He's a champagne socialist.
Yeah, they move to the next thing. Exactly. There's always another thing. And like half the time, it's all a game of telephone. So they heard all this from someone else. They have no idea about the context. If you ask them to break down, like, why is he a terrorist supporter? They couldn't do it. They'd be like, well, someone told me that. And like that's kind of conversation on the internet in general, right? People like define their positions and take these really hardline stances based on almost no information that they actually obtain themselves. It's all secondhand through people who have a vested interest in making them mad about something. And like, it just goes on and on and on that way. It doesn't lend itself at all to like good faith arguments or conversation. It's just a never ending spiral.
Yeah. And so that brings me to kind of like the book. I want to get back to the book. How do you like, what do you think is unique about streaming as a content? And what are some of really exciting things about streaming from the perspective of journalism? And what are some of the like really depressing and concerning things that we might need to address going forward?
Well, to like kind of take things from, or to kind of talk about, like, for example, Hassan some, he's made this point a lot, where one of the upsides of streaming in particular is that because you can be present for such a long period of time and talk for such a long time, you actually can get these more nuanced points across.
Correct.
And, if somebody in chat is voicing a misconception, you can pull them aside and say, hey, let's break this down a little bit. Let's use this as an example to show to everyone else, not necessarily to change this particular person's mind or to castigate them so that they like never make this mistake again, but more as just like, this can be, we can all learn from this. If you meet somebody in the future who's saying these same things, now you know what to say to them in response. That's really handy. That entire mechanism is really nice. And like, if you have a good and engaged audience, then a lot of the conversations you'll be having just by virtue of the format will probably be pretty good faith. Like, you'll get some shitheads in chat after a certain size because you always do. But a lot of your audience will probably be like chill and looking to learn from you and talk to you and, spend this time well. Now, there are all these other mechanisms online. Huh?
Can I jump in just to back up what you're saying here? So basically, this is why I think streaming is causing such existential crises among more mainstream media. Is like, we have demonstrated, and I think podcasting did this as well. which is that people don't want to be treated like a fifth grader. They don't want fifth grade level conversations that are 10 minutes. They want you, they don't want to just be, and a lot of mass media has been focused on conclusions rather than coming to conclusions. So it's like, you turn on, you open them at New York Times and it's like, the Houthis are evil and we need to fight a war against them. Right? Like, it's not, this is a discussion of, geopolitical questions. And there's not a, this is, we have the Persian Gulf and it produces oil for Japan. And, this is, there's a dependency of the world economy. And this group represents a threat to an ally, a strategic ally of ours, Saudi Arabia. Like, people are not having conversations of depth with geopolitics. Right. It is, these are designated terrorists from people in authority supporting the status quo ideas, right? And that is what mass media is for. Mass media is for creating societal consensus around elite-derived conclusions, right?
Yep.
Where streaming is not that. Streaming is a bottom-up, in a certain sense, meritocracy for certain positions that are coming from a personality that is free from the elite gatekeeping and selection process and, wealth. It doesn't take a lot to start a stream, right? And so I could build up my community offering an alternative perspective, and I could do it with analytical depth. And when people talk to me, and I could bring up the New York Times op-ed page, I could read it, then I could pull up sources from the United Nations or, Amnesty International, or I can show this book from a historian, and I could give all this context, and I could have
you could show this book, Stream Big by Nathan Grayson.
Exactly. Buy Stream Big. And that I think is what makes streaming so much more compelling than traditional television or other forms of media, is that we are able to have a long-term, interactive, in-depth conversation that treats the audience like adults.
Right. Which, because, so I saw somebody in chat a few minutes ago say that, like, most people are dumber than fifth graders. And I don't agree with that. I think that most people are pretty intelligent. It's just that, they've been propagandized and militarized into believing all of this really stupid stuff and into, like, biting on all these bad faith arguments because that's all they've ever been fed. And if you give people, like, a better diet of information, and I'm not saying that, like, we can win all these battles with the marketplace of ideas. I think that's also a stupid position. But I think that in general, if you, treat people like they're actually intelligent and, like, give them good information, then they will oftentimes come to pretty good conclusions. They're just drowned in terrible slop. And also, under capitalism, they're forced to be working constantly. They don't have time to actually, like, learn or create coherent positions for themselves. And that's all by design.
There's one other thing that I would say. The other thing is, I call it pundit brain. But basically, we have all been trained to have contempt for other people. And so we need to manipulate others. And it's like, you don't vote for what you believe is the right answer. You vote for what you calculate your dumbass neighbor will accept. You know what I mean? It's like, nobody was saying, I can't wait to vote for Joe Biden in 2020. It was the manipulation that was done on people was to make them manipulators, which is, I don't like Joe, but he's electable. Why is he electable? Well, because some other person would vote for him because he's more moderate or whatever. And so the Democratic Party, we had a situation in 2020 where the majority of people who supported Medicare for all voted for Biden. And it's like, you voted against what you think is the good policy because you were concerned about manipulating or creating, picking something that somebody else would find attractive, rather than effectively asserting your beliefs or your interests, which is what that's what politics is supposed to be. It's supposed to be these different interest groups, asserting their interest and their knowledge. That's the magic of democracy, right? I have knowledge, I have interest, I assert that, and then we come together to a compromise. As opposed to that, it was almost like a pre-compromise. I don't vote for what I believe or what my interests are. I'm voting for what other people will think is acceptable. And they're trained in that pundit brain. They're trained in that fifth grade horse race politics. They're not trained in class consciousness. They're not trained in my interest and I have a right and believing in, a better world. And that's what I'm trying to untrain people. Is it's like, because you believe other people are stupid, because you believe other people are unreachable, you vote stupid. You vote unreachable. You transform yourself into the dumbass because you're now you're now no longer supporting.
It's painting clown makeup on your face, man.
Exactly. And that's what our media does. Our media trains us to think everyone else is an asshole, everyone else is violent, everyone else is stupid, everyone else is unreachable, everyone else is unpersuadable. And then all of a sudden you find yourself voting for Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, and before you know it, Donald Trump is winning. And that is the crisis that we have. Stop, and this is my big message, stop voting for what other people find attractive and start voting for what you find attractive, and then we'll fight it out. Then we'll see where we end up. And like, I don't know how you break free of that kind of MSNBC pundit brain being in people's minds, and that's why the first thing I try to say to people is, actually, most people are good people, most people are intelligent, most people can be trained, most people they're just trapped, as you rightly said, in a swirl of dumbass propaganda and bullshit. And that is what I think is really exciting about streaming, is we get to have those conversations and we get to, deal with those arguments.
Yeah. And like the fact that those conversations are resonating with people too. I mean, there's a reason why people like Hassan and yourself have these really large audiences, because they realize they can sense that something is wrong. And, you guys are putting words to what that is and allowing them to see better alternatives, which exist and have existed for a very long time. There have been tons of people fighting against these systems. They just have gotten drowned out by more traditional media, or treated as fringe, or equated with like movements that are not even as big as theirs. All of the normal problems with traditional media. And now there's finally a chance for something different to potentially arise. I think we're in that very precarious moment where either we could make something really, really good out of what's about, the catastrophe that's about to occur, or things could just be worse than we could ever comprehend for an indefinite period of time.
I mean, there's a lot of pressure on, if we were to talk about politics for a second, there's a lot of pressure on the American hegemony now, because the cracks in our system and the lead that we had is running out, right? Like the United States, imagine a mile-long race and the U.S. was 20 seconds ahead. But now we're in the final lap and China is, sprinting and we're dragging ass. And like, either we find the second wind and start sprinting again ourselves, or else they're just going to blow right on by us. And their system, and I have a lot of criticisms of it, but I have a lot more sympathy for it than almost every other person in the fucking political sphere, because I actually look at results, right? And I think that the way that China has raised 700 million people out of poverty, well, there are other countries, there's like India, there is Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, there's Latin America. Well, they have not found that same success. So there's something about their model.
More than the population of the United States.
Correct. Yeah, there's something about their model that has utility and should be learned from. And part of that is like, they dream big, they invest for the long term. You know, and like, I think we could steal that. We used to do that, and we need to do that now if we want to have, a more cosmopolitan or some of the liberal values you and I are accustomed to being properly. And when I say liberal values, I mean stuff like freedom of speech. I get to call Donald Trump Drump or whatever the fuck. I think that has some value, right? And the cosmopolitan sexuality of an urbanite, that I have, right? Like I think that those things, it's good, that those things are permitted. There's a Cheeto in the White House, yeah, exactly. I think it's good that you're allowed to call him a Cheeto, right? But overall, so what I'm trying to say here is like, this is what the exciting part of streaming is for me. And one thing that I would suggest to you is, actually, we already have our first streamer president. Do you know who I'm thinking of?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about how they got into the White House or what helped them, like Trump definitely was aided by like Aiden Ross.
I would say
Theo
that
Vaughn, the Nelk Boys, etc.
I would say he's more of a Twitter president. But
he definitely is. But I mean,
streamer adjacent.
Through Barron, embraced the kind of content creation scene this time in the manosphere.
Yeah,
and like that helped him. Like it's hard to measure exactly how much that helped him. But getting endorsed by like fucking FaZe Banks couldn't have hurt.
I would say I will give you partial credit, but the person that I'm really thinking of is the person who streams every day on YouTube, Claudia Scheinbaum, the president of Mexico. And this is something that AMLO used to do.
Man, Mexico is fucking doing great right now.
Mexico is winning, chat. Mexico is winning. So Claudia, who worked on the IPCC and has a PhD and is one of the most exciting leaders in the world, and AMLO before her, the founder of her party, they stream for, he would do like 3 or 4 hours. She does like 2 or 3 hours every day. And they will go up there and they do a live stream and they have regular Mexicans and they come and talk about things and they're like, they point out what they're doing, what the problems are, and they get, they take live feedback. It's a streamer shit. It's streamer shit.
Yeah. It's like using the medium as actual content creators use it, as opposed to. So this was a thing
as opposed to Trump going on one. Yeah, I will give you partial credit for him embracing streaming as an idea, but she actually
even before
streams.
that though. Even before that, so in my book, like in the chapter focused on Hassan and politics and whatnot, I wrote most of that chapter in like 2023, 2020, a little bit in 2024, and that was the period of time where like AOC had done her streams, had played Among Us with people, had gotten these massive viewerships, and then there weren't really politicians following her. Like, I mean, of all people, fucking Matt Gaetz tried and got like 6 viewers and gave up forever.
Streaming's hard.
Yeah, it's really hard. And so there's this question of why aren't politicians using this? Oh, and what's because it requires this massive time commitment. And like, if you're not doing it to do it, then you're just not going to build an audience.
They have the time.
Yeah. And so it's funny because in my book, I was like, I guess just like the way that this is going to happen from now on is more that politicians will come on other people's streams, but they probably won't do it themselves. And now, like, I've got to, go into that part of my book and write "never mind" in giant capital letters.
Yeah, but I actually I do think that, and if you look at her approval rating, it's in the 70%, and that's after 5 years of her party in power. So just to kind of like understand, and they went through COVID, they went through some really difficult shit, right? They have this cartels that were absolutely shot through the prior Mexican government with corruption. They have a hostile neighbor. I mean, the United States is a dangerous and interventionist. The U.S. Intelligence services are absolutely shot through. USAID supporting all sorts of like anti-AMLO organizations. Like they're in a dangerous, precarious, life-threatening situation in Mexico politically, but yet they're winning anyway. They are just overwhelmingly winning. So I think for the left, for the so-called, like the center left, like the real center left, I'll call them left because the center left has been so tainted that you can't even call anyone that, even if they are. People call themselves social democrats who are like neolibs. It's very odd. But I look at that and I say, this is why your book is so interesting to me, is it's like, I think of streaming like as there's a bifurcation of the media of the future. It's going to be streaming for 5 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, and it's also going to be ultra short content. Yeah,
30-second, 90-second, whatever videos.
So it's like we're seeing media of like, highly engaging, highly in depth, and then the dumbest just slop 30-second snippets that are hyper engaging, and that's the way that media is going to bifurcate itself.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because a lot of people will talk about how they engage with TikTok or Instagram Reels or whatever, and they'll say, oh yeah, I spent like 4 hours scrolling. So you're still filling the same amount of time. You're just filling it with either hyper digestible nonsense or like one person talking at you unfiltered for several hours. And in both cases, like not all of that is going to be valuable, especially if you're talking about like TikTok or Instagram. You have that effect of like emerging from it in almost like an amnesia like state. Like, what did I hate it. I hate like, I honestly despise
happened? It. I despise it.
I mean, I'm not a huge fan either, but I still fucking do it.
I mean, we all occasionally just, I think of it as like almost putting your brain in standby mode.
Yep.
It's like the ultimate, it's like a half sleep. It's like being half asleep for me when I watch
dolphins
these things.
do.
Yeah. Like dolphins do. Like what half of your brain is off. Like, I'll find myself watching Labrador Retriever videos, like that's what my feed can get into. Or my feed is like Labrador Retriever videos and like worker comedy sketches where it's like there's this guy who does a whole thing about like the restaurant industry. There's a guy, he's an eye doctor, and he talks about the medical industry and he does a bunch of skits with like, various types of doctor or nurse or whatever. and he plays all the characters. That's the type of stuff on my feed. You know, what's his Glomlo Flecken? I can't remember his name. It's hard to pronounce. But yeah. So, okay. Well, it's already been an hour. I don't know how much longer you want to go. You let me know.
Man, however long. We've only a little bit discussed the book.
So yeah, let's do more of the book. Okay. Well, you know, get me back on a big. Okay. So why did you pick who you picked?
Yeah.
If you don't mind me asking.
So just in general, the reason I wrote the book the way that I did was because there are a lot of books out there already about like other platforms. You know, there's the YouTube book, there's a TikTok book, all of those sorts of things, but they're very focused on like the platform itself. They're like, here's how it got started. Here's the people who made that happen. Here are comments from various employees and executives. And I think that in general, there's not like a huge amount of interest in that for most normal people. And especially for Twitch, I just don't. I mean, I've covered Twitch for, again, like 8 years. And anytime that I'd publish an article about Twitch itself, unless it was like about Twitch making some boneheaded decision that everyone got pissed off about, no one would care. People care about personalities. They care about people. And so it's like, okay,
yeah,
I will tell the story of this platform through the people who use it. Because also I think that they're the ones who matter. Twitch wouldn't be what it is without the creators who are on it. If all of them left tomorrow, it would descend into ruin immediately. And also, like, if you look at, you know, the trajectory of the company, it's just gotten worse over time because executives have made worse and worse decisions. And so, yeah, the ones that I picked a pretty wide variety of creators because I wanted to have both big and small creators represented because they live in different worlds. You know, Twitch can say all at once about treating people equally. It doesn't.
Oh,
and also
not. I'm treated completely different than somebody who has, like, you know, if I go to TwitchCon, this is very funny to admit because I think it's ridiculous, but it is true. If I go to TwitchCon, I will have a bodyguard if I want. You know, like, yeah. I could get, you know, a black car, you know, and shit like that. It's very stupid and funny. But you know, other people, there's like a secret lounge for me, you know, and things like this. I'm sorry, Twitch, but I'm just telling you, this is the reality. Like, there is a different way that people are treated, and that kind of does make a little bit of sense to defend Twitch for a second, because the internet is very dangerous, and there's a lot of really dangerous psycho people that can hyperfixate on you, and this creates a very intense parasocial relationship. Do you go into like the idea of parasocial relationships in the book?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So that's present in a lot of chapters. The main one that really touches on it is the chapter about Dream, who, you know, everybody in chat probably is aware of. It's a Minecraft YouTuber and streamer. Dream SMP, tons of drama, all that stuff. And so basically it was really funny because I interviewed him a couple days after his face reveal at TwitchCon that year. And so, like, did that interview, went fine. Even at that time, I like had this inkling of the way that he treats his audience is not entirely appropriate. And so I asked him about some of the parasociality and his thoughts on that. And like, again, I thought it was a pretty prescient interview. I was like, good on me. I'm going to publish like an article on this and then I'll be done with it. And then as I was getting on the plane to go home from TwitchCon, that is when the allegations about Dream came out. I was like scrolling Twitter. I saw the hashtag, and I was like, "Do
you remember what some of them were?"
The allegations.
Yes.
Yeah. So they all centered around like his interactions with, you know, girls and women he'd been talking to in DMs, mainly on Snapchat. And so a couple of people suggested that he like either took things too far in what he said, or even that he was going to like travel out to see them. He was like, "No, we just talked a little bit," and you know, they're making things up about me. It is unclear to this day, you know, which element of that is true. What is true, and what I focused on in my chapter, is that he definitely crossed the line in terms of what you should do when you are, you know, a YouTuber with 30 million followers interacting with a fan who's just a normal person who is younger than you and all of this other stuff. Like, at that point, you have an obvious responsibility. And it was one that I think Dream tried to not be aware of for a long time, or even tried to, you know, in some cases profit off of.
Yeah, I mean, before you came on, we were covering the allegations and lawsuit that was been filed against Destiny, the streamer Destiny, Stephen Bonnell the second, who is being sued by a kind of like what we call an orbiter. And chat, if you don't know what an orbiter is, it's basically a creator who is a smaller creator who interacts frequently with a larger creator. And so they kind of build their audience and their network because they make related content and they're friends with a bigger creator. And it helps. It's one of the best ways, it's networking. It's one of the best ways for a smaller creator to become a big creator is by networking with larger streamers and, getting access to their audience who is probably already pre-vetted for being interested in their type of content, right? Like
and
if you want to be a political streamer,
Twitch.
Say again?
You kind of have to on Twitch simply because Twitch is like discoverability is trash. So you grow through, knowing and meeting other people and getting exposed to their audiences consistently.
By the way, I don't know that is a fixable thing. Like, I'm going to say something very, very controversial. I don't know that Twitch can fix the discoverability issue with streaming. Because it's like, streaming is about a long form, content creation process, right? You have to really sit there. And the idea that I'm going to just invest hours into any random content creator is very questionable, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, what makes you want to invest in someone? It kind of makes sense for you to have that a little bit filtered, right? A little bit like, I'm somebody you like. You should take a chance with this person. Right?
Yeah, I like that way better than the kind of algorithmic sorting that you get on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and everywhere else, at least in theory. Because then you're like, you're finding new sources of information from people who you trust. Whereas, on YouTube and TikTok and everywhere else, it's just like, here's a thing that we think you might like based on your previous history. It could be, just somebody else playing video games, or it could be a Nazi. Like that's just not a great way to do things. And also it leads to people devaluing the idea of where they get their information because it's just being served to them. They don't think about who provided them with that like connection. They don't, that's just not even a calculation you make. Whereas I think that in a better and more sane world, we would be putting a lot more thought into that. We would be actively seeking out information we think is good and trying to figure out, okay, who can I trust on this? Why is this potentially bad faith? So on and so forth.
Yeah, and so discoverability as a problem, and like there's some ideas of like, well, you could use short form content to attract people to your long form content, and my response to that is, of course, that makes perfect sense, but you're incentivizing people to make short term clippable content. Like, you see what I mean? Like, those are different skills. Making short term content is a different skill than making long term content. They're related. Absolutely. And you could probably figure out the one if you're good at the other, but not always. And like streaming is about the long form thing. So, the networking thing and and that's related to parasociality, right? Because you trust the streamer. And so when they recommend somebody, you're they're taking advantage of that trust, right? To get you to watch someone else or vice versa, right? And so the allegation with Destiny of parasocialism is, there's this tremendous power imbalance. When you have an audience like I do, and you have thousands of subscribers, and you've got, tens of thousands of followers on this platform, that is worth a lot of money. That is worth a lot. That is a career. I am now independent. I don't have to ever work for anyone again as long as I have this stream. And that's a level of freedom that you don't often get in this society. And so being an influencer, being a creator is incredibly attractive to most people because of that freedom and that security that you can build, right? And so a lot of people who want to be content creators, they're very inclined to kiss up to you, right? And you could create an environment of exploitation. And so we've seen that. Do you have any thoughts on whether or not this is something that we need to talk about more as a society, or we need to create certain, like, I don't know if laws are right or regulations are right or just policies, but like this has been something that's been a problem for a long time for parasocials ever since we've had mass media, right? We've had celebrities and we have parasocial relationships and the concept of a groupie. or the concept of somebody who, you know, is a fan of yours and you take advantage of that to take their money or have a sexual encounter that they wouldn't have with a stranger, right? And it's because they've got a invented persona that they've attached to, and they think it's you, and you take advantage of that.
Yeah. I mean, like, how do we handle that? You know,
how do we handle that?
It's a very big and open question. I think that, you know, on a social level, taking advantage of somebody who's like a fan of yours, or like bringing them into your circle, and then like, you know, turning it into something that's like romantic or sexual or whatever, should just be disqualifying. I think that if we collectively hear about a creator doing that, that should just be like, nah, you're on the shit list now. Like, I think that if you are someone with a big audience, you can't engage with that stuff. You got to create a firewall. You've got to be apart from it, because there's no way that the person on the other side of that fence can come in uncompromised. They are not going to be playing with the same, you know, deck of cards as you. They're not going to have the same amount of power. It is a massive power imbalance. No matter how upstanding you are as a human being, you probably can't navigate that in a way where you won't in some way or another take advantage of them or harm them. Just don't fucking do it. But of course, people are people. They're going to be tempted. And like at that point, you know, who meets out accountability? That's the hard part. Because like, unless we have consistent systems of accountability here, then there will always be people taking advantage of this power imbalance. But we can't leave it in the hands of the platforms. They suck at this, and they increasingly don't care, as evidenced by, you know, the recent actions of Elon Musk and of Mark Zuckerberg and so on. We can't really leave it in the hands of the community and the populace, because they will be inconsistent, and like there will always be people who say like, well, I don't want accountability, or I don't want this creator to be accountable, because if I ever become successful, then they'll hold me accountable, and I hate that idea. You know, government is too slow. At least our government has proven to be. I think a better government could handle this, but we don't have that. So it's really hard. Like, I don't think there's a good answer right now, and I wish there was. I think that for the moment, you know, because communities on the internet are so atomized, because like you have your community and they have one set of expectations, whereas like Asmongold or Destiny's or Ethan's or whatever would have a totally different set of expectations. The best you can do is like within community policing. So, you know, your community holds you accountable, they hold themselves accountable, and so on. And like you as the kind of figurehead of that community has to be really like on about all of this, has to be kind of ensuring that people stick to their guns, that they don't step out of line, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, that brings us to one of the subjects of your book. I hate to get spicy with you, but Keffals. Okay, like you have Keffals as one of the creators, and like you know, I think when you started writing the book, I probably had the same. I you know, I haven't read it yet, so I don't know how you cover her, but I probably had the same expectations as you did. You know, I knew Keffals because as a prominent left winger on Twitter, I made relationships, and you know, I had mutual followings with larger left wing, you know, posters on there. You know, for me, my introduction to Keffals came from a creator called Liv Agar. That's a podcast. You know, QAnon Anonymous. She's a part-time streamer on Twitch.
She's great. She's really funny.
I think of Liv Agar as probably one of the most intelligent people that uses Twitch. High praise. I really like Liv. Very funny. You know, I think she's pursuing a PhD in philosophy or something right now. I'm not quite sure, but like, you know, she's one of those people. And she has a podcast, QAnon Anonymous. So I became familiar with Keffals, and you know, she was like a strong, you know, hard left politically, you know, and I'm always trying to encourage more and more people like that to exist on this platform. And the thing with Keffals is she kind of seems to have done some of the stuff that you're talking about, right? And she was originally harassed by a famous, you know, doxing website. We don't even really need to name it, right? And she set up a stop this website effort, and she raised a bunch of money for that. You know, she accused and she said she was going to pursue this, you know, this
legal actions
against like
police,
police for, you know,
for dead naming her, and otherwise treating her poorly while she was in their hands.
But I don't know, I'm not trying to say these. I've just heard that she has kind of appropriated the money, not for the purpose of the legal fees that the people were legitimately donating to. What is your angle on Keffals? What do you think about like the way her content has evolved? I think she's kind of withdrawn from the internet.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
Yeah, she's pretty much disappeared off the internet. So it was interesting because and I like this about the way that the writing the book unfolded, because it took multiple years. And so when I first talked to Keffals for the purpose of the book, it was like when all the Kiwi Farm stuff was happening, when she was in the midst of it, when she was still theoretically like on the run or like bouncing between countries.
Right.
It was kind of toward the end of that period of time. So she was at TwitchCon. And, I interviewed her and all the people she'd been working with during like the Drop Kiwi Farms effort. And, it all seemed like a pretty straightforward story of somebody who decided to take this moment of being harassed and turn it into something more productive.
Which is really awesome, by the way.
Getting Kiwi Farms off the internet. Yeah.
And everybody supported
I think that was and I think that was a valiant and worthwhile effort, even if Kiwi Farms more or less managed to survive it, because, you can always find a new web hosting provider if you really look hard enough.
Right.
But, over time, her approach to things changed and more about her and her past came to light. And like, I think that some of her worst instincts, that being like her combativeness, was compounded by being in the spotlight and being a content creator, where like drama thrives. And the way to get an audience or to sustain an audience, especially after you've had this big moment, but then things have kind of gone back to normal, is to get in all these fights and, say all this incendiary shit.
Bullish. Doesn't work.
Yeah. And like do all this contrarian shit, for example, like start hanging out with Destiny, all of that. And so she succumbed to all of these like really bad instincts, and also like revealed over time that she had embellished certain elements of like her various stories. And I think that like she was doing a lot of that in service of, especially with Kiwi Farms, in service of like what she saw to be a greater good, but it still wasn't smart. It still wasn't the right thing to do in that moment. And then, she had her stint in rehab after which again, it's hard to kind of decouple a lot of these things, because I think it'd be easy to tell a story of Keffals is good or Keffals is bad, when neither of these is really true. She's just an incredibly flawed person who got a big spotlight. And so like you look at some of the dishonesty and you're like, well, that sucks. She's bad. And then you look at, her falling into drug addiction because of the stress of being harassed by people day in and day out.
Yeah, relapsing.
That's really sad. That's like a very sympathetic story. That's like, I hope this person gets help and gets better.
Yeah.
And so I think the kind of, that's sort of the needle I tried to thread of just like, here are all these things that happened. Here is who this person is, both as a result of these things, and here's the ways that she kind of brought some of this on herself, but certainly not all of it. And like by the end, I've got a number of quotes from her in there of her being like, yeah, I fucked up and I'm sorry. And like, trying to do better, trying to make content that just like appeals to me and so on. And then as for kind of the legalities, people were really skeptical about whether or not she was going to pursue action against the police force that swatted her. I talked to her lawyer. I talked to her about it. They did like file something. They said that basically the system in Canada is super backed up, and it takes literal years for courts to get to any of this.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to end up winning in the context of politics now.
Yeah, I did go through all of the because you can search all these records publicly. And so I went through, and sure enough, like most of the cases that court is hearing now, or like that tribunal, it's not a court, is hearing in this day and age, are from like 4 or 5 years ago. Like it is really super fucking backed up. So, I mean, she filed a thing, and then that's kind of where it sits for now. Did the money that she got from the GoFundMe directly contribute to that? Hard to say, because a lot of that money also I think she spent it during the time period immediately following her getting arrested, which unto itself is like, okay, well, why did you need that money if they returned your digital devices
exactly
right after it's complicated. But then at the same time, if you're being
misappropriated
harassed,
funds is probably something that maybe need to be looked into. And I think
but also if you're being harassed and theoretically digitally chased across the world by a bunch of shitheads, you probably need to have a little extra money on hand. And Keppel's made what, like her GoFundMe got up to a little over 100K. This is not in any way trying to like denigrate people's arguments against what she did, but like 100K is not that much.
It's a lot, but it's not.
I would love to have
much.
100K. I'd love to be making that much per year. Parenthetical aside, I'm super not. I'm making so much less money. Well, it depends
on how many people buy the book, Nathan. You know, if more people buy the book, you know, maybe you can.
If you want to peek behind the curtain, authors don't make any money off royalties anymore.
Is that real?
It's all in your advance. Even
really?
Like really successful, because you've got to sell through your advance to start making money off of royalties.
Right.
And so they make your advance just big enough that you're never going to get through it. But
that's nice that you're getting it up front at least.
Yeah, sort of. Well, you get a part of it when you get the deal, another part when you turn in the finalized manuscript, and then another part when the book comes out. So they spread it out such that you're basically like, most authors are not making minimum wage relative to the hours that they're putting into the book.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, hopefully we can help you get through it.
That would be wonderful. If anyone wants to buy the book after listening to that impassioned plea to give me money, then by all means.
Yeah, no, definitely do. And I think that was a very fair and balanced and truthful, and my perspective, honestly, Nathan. And you know, I personally disengaged from her when I saw kind of some really unhealthy and dangerous behaviors.
Yeah,
because I think that's my responsibility as a content creator, is to show compassion and empathy for people, but also kind of protect and steer my audience away from people that
absolutely. I think it's your number one responsibility.
Yeah. And to go back to the other thing you were saying about parasocial relationships, I have that self-imposed, you know, policy of avoiding taking advantage of my audience members. It's not to say I've never made friends with people that became fans of mine, but I always approach it with that very strong perspective of the power that I have and the trust that I have, and try to treat them as equals all the way, and never ever, you know, exploit that advantage. And I find the idea of doing that to be morally reprehensible. But I also understand that a lot of people, my personal moral beliefs are not going to make this country or society better in and of themselves. I have to create and push for a more collective approach. And that brings me to like some of the other creators. I don't know how much more time you want to go on. I'm happy to keep talking. You know, I'm
we can go for a little bit longer. I've got to go do Aftermath's stream and podcast at 4. Or sorry, wait, let me transpose this at 1 p.m. Your time.
Yeah, why don't we go for like, you know, 20 more, and then you have a nice gap there. So that brings me to like Amaranth. I wanted to ask you a little bit about Amaranth as a creator. What was your, you know, maybe there's some like highlights or some something that you will talk about, which is like the interplay between like sex work and like more mainstream platforms like Twitch, right? Because like Twitch is not a sex site. It's not a site for sexual content. It is, however, there are sex workers that use Twitch and have built up communities that do consume some content on other websites that they're associated with. So what was your perspective of like Amaranth and her view towards streaming in general?
Yeah. So something that I go into in that chapter is that the earliest kind of efforts in what is now considered live streaming, the building blocks of what became live streaming, a lot of that was rooted in sex work or sex work adjacent activities. The person who's generally considered to be or credited with like, you know, doing the first thing that resembled live streaming, where it was basically like a college student. She had a webcam in her dorm room that would photograph her every 15 seconds or so and like upload that. You know, one of the things that she did increasingly within that is like, she would, you know, either not have clothes on in that scenario or like have sex. So there's always been like a component of sex adjacent activities to live streaming, and like sex workers have used it a lot over the years. And so then you get into this murky territory where some of them use Twitch to engage with their audiences and to perform, you know, somewhat risque behaviors, although usually trying to be within the terms of service. And Twitch sort of like has to play this weird game with them where they're like, okay, you're good. Nope, too far. Never mind. Now we're going to ban or suspend you. Now we're going to implement new rules to preclude you from doing this. And like, on one hand, I understand why Twitch approaches things that way because, they want to keep their advertisers. They want to do all of these things that a like bigger, more mainstream company would do. But on the other hand, like this is to an extent, like what they are using, the technology, the ideas are things that sex workers helped build. And so it is kind of unfair, at the very least, that they are now, shunted out the back door. And
I think
it makes sense again. Yeah. So
yeah. If I could just jump in, I honestly think this is where Twitch makes the most mistakes because it's just like, obviously, I do think that we don't want to make this a pornographic website. And what is porn? You know it when you see it. It's hard. It's not a firm. There isn't a firm distinction between something that's risque and porn. There's probably a line, right? But there's a gradient there. And then there's like hardcore pornography, and then there's like softcore pornography. There's nudity, but then there's some nudity that isn't sexual, right?
Right. This is the thing that Twitch is always grappling with is like, what counts as nudity that's sexual versus not. Like you can do body painting on Twitch. That's not sexual. But then you could have somebody who is wearing comparatively more than a body painter. But like if they're in the wrong context, if they're in, like some room in their house instead of out at the swimming pool or something, then that's too sexual and they get in trouble. Or like they're wearing the wrong cosplay or whatever. Like Twitch makes their terms of service really vague on purpose. Right.
There's
and like a lot of those games.
Like,
if you play The Witcher on stream and there's a sex scene, you're fine. But if you, simulate any act of sex in real life, you are so banned on this platform that you will never come back.
So yeah, I mean, and what we're really talking about is the concepts of like, and this is where it gets interesting for me from a political perspective. Like, politics covers all aspects of human endeavor. And when we talk about like, what is pornography, what is obscenity, what is artistic value, these are very weighty, difficult questions to answer. And I feel like my main objection to Twitch is they're way too involved in answering the question. I think there is kind of like a fear of an advertiser backlash. There's a fear of a community backlash, and they kind of feed into it. They create the environment of, we're accepting your opinion on whether this thing is a violation of terms of service. So come yell at us and tell us that, oh no, she's projecting her Fortnite gameplay on her butt, but she's wearing tight pants. And it's like, who gives a fuck?
Yeah.
This is not porn. Funny. This is okay. It's risque. Okay. There's a sexual element, but shut the fuck up, and otherwise, and I think that's part of what hurts Twitch actually, because other platforms like, say, for example, YouTube or TikTok don't do that. They ban people who do sex, they ban porn. But if somebody is, for the longest time on Twitch, twerking was banned. Twerking was banned. One of the most common forms of dancing in America. You go to any club and in the world is somebody fucking twerking. And you know what caused twerking to get unbanned on Twitch? Do you actually know?
I don't think I do.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I said I don't think I do.
Oh, okay. Well, Nicki Minaj was invited to Kai Cenat's stream. And it's like, of course you want Nicki Minaj on Twitch.
Yeah,
but then you're gonna ban them in the middle of her twerking for her dad. Like, you know what I mean? It's absurd. It's an absurd stupidity. And yet Twitch allowed themselves to be maneuvered in this. And whereas, TikTok helped, part of the reason why TikTok grew is they were a bunch of women dancing. What I mean? Like, that's part of what people liked, is women were in, yoga pants dancing to music. Who gives a shit?
Right.
Like, who gives a shit? And yet we have this, so somebody like Amaranth, actually what makes her funny is she's a very intelligent woman and a very thoughtful person. And she kind of uses the restrictions as intellectual and artistic.
She gets really creative with it.
Get creative on how I can bend the rules.
Yeah. And this is like this is the funny part of all of this, is that, without Twitch's really arbitrary restrictions, we wouldn't have gotten some of this creativity.
Exactly.
And so like there are pros and cons to that as well. But I do agree with you broadly. Like, we don't really need Twitch overseeing every element of this. And also they're just bad at it. Like, they've proven to be bad at it time and time again. In part because these are really hard questions to answer. After a certain point, again, I think that you kind of let the community figure itself out. But Twitch, I think, as a company has always been, well, Twitch has been really bad at communicating, but they try to be present in part because Twitch emerged from being a really community focused company back when it first launched, like way back in fucking 2011. Most of their employees were people they hired who like were streamers who came out of the community or who were like esports people and all of that.
Yeah.
And so there's always been this expectation on Twitch from creators to be like part of everything, to, make sure that people are behaving the right way. Like, hey, if this person says something wrong, ban them.
Crazy.
Or to like be present at events and all these ways that like you don't see the same expectation placed on YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or whatever.
Would you even want that?
Faceless behemoths? No, definitely not.
I think part of the only reason
Twitch can even still do any of this, and they're struggling now in a big way with it, is because Twitch is a comparatively smaller and more niche platform. And so like, it's just not quite at like, it's not at YouTube scale or anything even resembling it. But even at its current scale, like, take, for example, the partner program that grew out of a time period when Twitch was orders of magnitude smaller. And so they could like assign partner managers to every partnered streamer. Now that's impossible. Now the partner program makes no sense as a thing that exists. It has no real features. Most partners are like, yeah, I just have a title next to my name now.
Depends.
And like, I get nothing else.
Like I, for example, am somebody who is like basically the same as it used to be. I have account managers. I have, things like that. Because again, it's based on your, it's a performance-based thing. And it's like, am I really the same thing as somebody who has 70 viewers? And it's like,
no, absolutely not.
Exactly.
You're not even remotely the same thing. But point being is like, for a long time, Twitch was able to be, to an extent, authentically community focused and actually, talk directly to people. And now they're trying to do a version of that at a much larger scale that doesn't work and can't work unless you hire like, tens of thousands of people, which Twitch is obviously not interested in doing anymore, as evidenced by the fact that they're instead laying everyone off and trying to cut costs wherever possible to finally turn a profit. So they have all of these goals that are at odds with each other, which results in, a number of problems up to and including their inability to consistently or effectively moderate things like sexual content.
Yeah. And, I've, in my discussions with various Twitch, leadership, I always say to them, like, the best thing you could do is to recede into the background more, and you can, and just be less accessible. And, listen, I want you to keep the platform safe, but I've always counseled them, like, just go away. Stop responding to LSF threads. A 2000 upvoted post on Reddit doesn't fucking matter. You've got millions and millions of viewers. It doesn't. Stop responding to it. Stop making policy according to what somebody says. Because there's a certain
to the people who get loudest, which is always the problem. Is like, if you're talking about community, what is the community? Who represents it? What are the voices that are credible versus what is noise? And I think that Twitch's approach often is just whatever becomes the loudest is, the prevailing mentality or the thing that we should base our decisions on. And it's like, no, that's actually a really bad way to govern your platform. I think that Twitch's problem right now, especially, is that it just doesn't have much of a vision. It's pretty reactive, and it always has been. But especially now, like under Dan Clancy, they're just kind of like, and I don't think this is entirely Twitch itself's problem. I think it's also Amazon, again, laying tons of people off and kind of leaving them in this keep the lights on state. But that does feel like most of what they're doing. I mean, I agree to an extent, but I think that, if they're not making anything, if they're not really improving the platform in any particular way, beyond like guest star, which nobody fucking uses, then it will languish and people will slowly leave and it will slowly die. You got to be doing something. You can't just keep the lights on.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I have my grappling with Twitch is there is this kind of like big fish, small pond mentality with a lot of the biggest creators. So some of the most profitable people, and even people who are not even on Twitch, this is kind of like a fascinating thing, and I want your thoughts on it. Like YouTubers commenting about Twitch TOS is like one of the most fascinating phenomenons that I see. And it's like, well, YouTube has way more worse and like rule breaking content than Twitch will ever have, as far as even sexual content or, risque content or like problematic political extremism, racism, fake news, stolen content, like anything you can complain about Twitch is true of YouTube by a quadrillion. But yet there is this kind of like community of YouTubers that talk about Twitch TOS violations. And I'm just like, log in your own eye. You know what I mean?
Right.
Before, like what's going on here? And I mean, I think, somebody like Ethan Klein is a perfect example, right? Like, you have people that are permanently banned on Twitch who make content on YouTube that is anti-Semitic, and yet he's going over here to try to criticize pro-Palestinian creators. And it kind of creates this, and it's like, why does the community tolerate this kind of shit? Like, fuck these people.
And it creates this illusion of like an outsized problem in one place when the actual, the foundations of that problem exist in the other place. Like to a much greater degree.
Correct.
But also, I think that people have a lot of problem understanding scope or understanding the scale of things. If you tell them, like, let's see. So Twitch, right? Like 250 million users, I think is the number. Twitch viewers, something like that. Anyway, YouTube viewership. Let's just check that number really fast because it's like well over 1 billion, right? It's like 2 billion people, I think, use
I think
YouTube.
Twitch is like 20% size of YouTube or something like that.
I mean, if even. Like these things are incomparable in their size.
No, I think Twitch has like 20-something% knowledge in the country, or like people that use it or something.
Right. But people hear two big numbers, one in the 100 millions and other in the billions, and think, oh yeah, they're both like about the same size. And it's like, no, they really aren't. And one of these things is governed in one way, and the other is governed in a completely different, far more hands-off way. So like, people are really bad at keeping these ideas in perspective, which allows somebody like Ethan to thrive when he's saying like, Twitch is so anti-Semitic. That's the locus of this problem. And it's like, no, it really, really isn't.
Ridiculous. Yeah. All right. Well, is there anything else you would like to draw our attention to? And then you can, and then also, or shill or plug. We have your thing linked to the chat. Mods, if I could get a big spam of that would be nice.
Okay. Call me Shilliam Shakespeare for what I'm about to do. So first of all, check out and buy the book, which there's a link in chat right now. It's called Stream Big, the triumphs and turmoils of Twitch and the stars behind the screen. Sorry, because it's like a double T title. So I'm like, what is the name of my book again? It's terrible. Anyway, and then also, if you like what you heard today, or just, what I've had to say in general, I am one of the founders of a website called Aftermath. We cover video games and internet culture, and we are fully worker owned and reader supported. If you want video games with a side helping of leftism, check us out. And if you really like what you see, consider subscribing. That is how we make all our money. We have absolutely also, there's somebody in chat called In the Aftermath who just said, whoa. But yeah, subscriptions are how we make all our money. We don't have any ads. We don't do any deals because we feel like that muddies the waters too much. So yeah, check it out.
True ethics in video game journalism. You love to see it. Yeah, Nathan Grayson, famous for his ethics. All right,
and then you can also find me on Blue Sky at Nathan Grayson, and Twitter at VAHN16. But Twitter sucks now, so go follow me on Blue Sky
Twitter.
Instead.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Nathan. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope we gave your book enough of attention that it deserves, and I hope everyone goes out to buy it.
You glazed it like you glazed Hassan. So.
Okay, dude. Don't even like. Honestly, I will find you at the next TwitchCon, and I will teach you respect. No, I'm kidding. All right, everybody. Thank you, Nathan. Have a good one, and I'll see you all soon.
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Later.
See ya.
Yep.
All right, chat. Thank you so much to Nathan for coming on.